The first thing Marin Voss noticed about the Vethkaiv emissary was that it had no face. Not in the way people meant when they said someone was unreadable. It genuinely had no face. No eyes, no mouth, no bilateral symmetry at all. Just a crown of sensory filaments that shifted like seagrass in current, and beneath that, a smooth, pale torso that tapered into 4 articulated limbs. It stood at the center of the mobile command post that had descended from the colony ship 3 hours after the detonation, and it smelled like ozone and something faintly sweet, the way a hospital room smells sweet when the cleaning staff has given up on the underlying rot. Marin studied it the way she studied dying tissue samples, dispassionately, with great attention to detail. "Dr. Voss," said the UN liaison standing beside her. He was sweating through his collar in the Nevada heat. "You understand what it's asking?" "I understand what it's telling us," she said. "There's a difference." The liaison didn't answer. Nobody ever did when she made that distinction. What the Vethkai was telling them, through its translation apparatus, a box on a folding table that pulsed amber when it processed their speech, was this: the contamination zone was unrecoverable. The compound that its military ship had deployed in this quadrant, the compound the Vethkai called by a name the translator rendered as silencer, had bonded irreversibly to the soil chemistry of the region. The 8 square miles around the impact point would not support Terran biology for approximately 400 years. The Vethkai were prepared to offer relocation assistance to affected human communities. They regretted the collateral damage of their weapons test, which had been conducted in what they had assessed as an uninhabited zone. 31,000 people lived in the townships surrounding the impact site. Marin had grown up in the closest one. She still had a house there. She still had a sister there. "I need access to the boundary," she said. The liaison turned to her. "Dr. Voss, I'm a xenobiologist. I study how alien biology interfaces with Earth-native ecosystems. I have been studying nothing else for 11 years. If there is any way to reverse or accelerate the decay of the silencer compound, I am the closest thing to an expert on this planet, and I need access to the contamination boundary so I collect samples." She looked at the Vethkai emissary. Its filaments were motionless. She couldn't tell if it was listening or sleeping or utterly indifferent. "Tell it that." The liaison relayed the request. The amber box pulsed. The emissary's filaments stirred. The translator spoke. "It says the zone is lethal at stage 1 exposure. It says it would recommend against." The liaison's voice was careful, telegraphing something between pity and relief. "It says the matter is settled." "Tell it," Marin said, "that I didn't ask for its recommendation." She left before the liaison could stop her. She had already arranged her own transport, Doctor. Jin-Soo Pak was waiting at the checkpoint in a rented truck with bad shocks and a face that said he hadn't slept in 30 hours. He had the maps and the hazmat equipment and the portable spectral analyzer she'd asked him to bring. He also had a thermos of coffee that he handed to her without a word before she'd even climbed into the passenger seat. Jin-Soo was her research partner of 6 years. He was the best materials analyst she'd ever worked with, and he had no talent for reassurance she valued more than she could say. "Checkpoint's soft," he said, pulling onto the access road. "National Guard rotation was 2 hours ago. We've got maybe 4 hours before they notice we're gone. We need 6, then we work faster." He handed her a tablet. On it were satellite images of the impact site, false color overlaid to show chemical gradients. At the center, a deep indosmear. At the edges, something she'd noticed in the briefing data and not been able to stop thinking about since. Green. Specifically, green in 3 discrete clusters. Vegetation not just surviving the compound, but showing accelerated cellular activity. "You saw it too," she said. "Day 2 data." The Vethkai's own instruments registered it. They marked it as instrument error. She stared at the green patches. They were clustered around what looked like a dry creek bed, maybe a quarter-mile inside the boundary. Native desert brush. Creosote, she thought. Something adjacent. Hardy plants with deep root systems that had been filtering this particular stripe of alkaline desert for centuries. "They don't know our plants," she said. "No," Jin-Soo agreed. "They don't." They drove the rest of the way in silence. The checkpoint was a prefab barricade with a single board soldier and a thermal scanner that Jin-Soo defeated with a thermal blanket and a story about livestock. Beyond it, the desert opened up in that particular way. Nevada had, not dramatic, not cinematic, just an honest gray flatness that went on until it became something else. They drove another mile before the air changed. It was subtle at first. A slight pressure behind the eyes, a metallic aftertaste that the respirators should have stopped. Marin made a note in her log and kept recording. First real evidence of the silencer was the silence. That was what the Vethkai translation rendered it as, and she'd thought it was a poetic choice until she got here. But the desert was genuinely, unnervingly quiet. No insects, no distant traffic, no wind through dry grass. Just the sound of their own footsteps and their own breathing, amplified by the respirator seals. Jin-Soo was collecting soil samples, kneeling in a systematic grid pattern, narrating into his recorder. She walked toward the creek bed. The plants were alive, more than alive. She crouched in front of a creosote stand. She was right creosote, and looked at the stems and leaves. The discoloration she'd expected from the satellite imaging was there. A faint iridescence, purple-blue, like oil on water, coating the waxy leaf surface. But the plant itself was not dying. The cellular structure, visible even under her handheld scope, showed active growth. The plant was doing something with the compound, not resisting it, using it. She had a word for that, an old word from her undergraduate ecology courses. Hyperaccumulation. The way certain plants pulled heavy metals from contaminated soil and stored them in their tissue. A phytoremediation mechanism, ancient as soil itself. Her hands were steadier than they had any right to be. She took 3 cuttings, sealed them in sample vials, took a 4th for immediate analysis. Jin-Soo, she called. Come look at this. He came. He looked. He looked for a long time without saying anything. And then he took out his spectral analyzer and held it over the leaf surface, and the readout came back in 40 seconds. He read it twice. Then he handed it to her. The plant had modified the silencer compound at a molecular level. It had stripped a specific peptide chain, the one, according to the Vethkai's own published data, that gave the compound its 4-century persistence, and was incorporating the remainder as a nutrient substrate. It had done it in 11 days. 11 days. We need more plants, she said. We need root tissue. We need to figure out the mechanism and if we can replicate it or accelerate it and how fast. Marin. Jin-Soo's voice was different, flat. She looked up. There was a person standing 50 yards away, watching them. A woman. Young, early 20s maybe, in clothes that had been washed a long time ago and then not washed since. She was holding something against her chest. As she got closer, Marin saw it was a child. Maybe 4 years old, head resting against the woman's shoulder. The woman's face was wrong. The skin around her eyes and along her jaw had the same iridescent tint as the plant leaves. Stage 1, maybe further. She stopped 20 feet away. Eyes went from Marin to Jin-Soo to the sample vials and back to Marin. You're not military, the woman said. No, Marin said. Scientists. Are you here to get us out? Marin didn't answer immediately. Jin-Soo said very carefully. There are still people inside the zone. My whole town, the woman said. 3 towns. The checkpoint went up the first night. They said it was temporary. She adjusted the child on her hip. Her arms were shaking with the effort. That was 11 days ago. We can't get out. The soldiers turn us back. They say it's quarantine protocol. They say they'll come with evacuation, but nobody comes. She looked at the child. Alina's not doing good. Marin came closer. The child's skin was worse than the woman's, a deeper iridescence, particularly around the lips and fingernails. Stage 2, she thought. May past it. What's your name, she said. Beth, the woman said. Bethany Ruiz. I've been walking for 2 days. I heard about the checkpoint and I don't know what I thought. You thought someone out here was doing something, Jin-Soo said. Are you? Marin was still looking at the sample vials, the leaf tissue, the modified compound. An old thought, one she'd had at 23 writing her first dissertation chapter. Biology is patient in a way that chemistry is not. We're going to start, she said. They went back through the checkpoint with Beth and Elena in the flatbed under a tarpaulin, which was not a sophisticated plan but was the one they had. At the makeshift research station Jin-Soo had established in an abandoned geological survey office 8 miles from the boundary, Marin ran the leaf samples through every analysis protocol she had, while Jin-Soo started a preliminary treatment synthesis and Beth sat in a folding chair, and watched them with eyes that were too tired to be afraid. Elena slept on a cot in the corner. Breathing was fine. That was the thing Marin kept coming back to. Neither Beth nor Elena were dying at the rate the Vethkai's own briefing materials projected for stage 2-3 exposure. Either the projections were wrong, or humans were handling this differently than the Vethkai expected. Or there was some other variable she was missing. She was so deep in the data that she almost missed the sound of tires on the gravel outside. Jinsu heard it first. He turned off the centrifuge. In the sudden quiet, they both heard it. More than one vehicle, several. Marin went to the window. 3 trucks. Military spec, not National Guard. The markings were different. Vethkai Liaison Corps. She'd seen those trucks outside the mobile command post. Back door, Jinsu said. She grabbed the sample cases. He grabbed the analyzer and his notebooks and the preliminary synthesis. They'd been running it in a portable incubator about the size of a shoebox. Beth was already awake, already reaching for Elena. They went out the back and into the scrub desert, and the trucks came in the front, and Marin didn't look back. She looked back once. Through a gap in the brush, she could see 2 figures in Vethkai liaison uniforms in the doorway of the survey office, and behind them the amber pulse of the translation apparatus, and behind that the shadow of a Vethkai emissary, standing very still. It had followed her. She didn't know if that meant she was a threat or a curiosity, or something the Vethkai language had a word for that the translator couldn't handle. She kept moving. Beth was strong. Marin had thought the woman might struggle, but she was carrying Elena without slowing. Them keeping pace, picking her footing without being told. 6 years of living at altitude, of growing up in a county where people fixed their own trucks and pulled their own cabs, doing things with their bodies that the Vethkai's briefing documents on human resilience had clearly not accounted for. "You're doing fine," Marin told her. "I know," Beth said. They covered 3 miles of open desert in 40 minutes. Jinsu found a drainage culvert under an access road and they stopped there, below the eye line of any aerial survey, while he checked the synthesis timer, and she set up the analyzer on her sample cases and kept working. She had the mechanism now, mostly. The creosote was doing something specific with the silencer compound's peptide chain, folding it, essentially, reorienting its spatial structure in a way that made it water-soluble and therefore processable through normal cellular pathways. It was elegant in the way that only something with 400 million years of iteration could be elegant. She couldn't replicate the folding enzyme exactly without equipment she didn't have, but she could mimic it. Not the full mechanism, a bridge molecule, something that would initiate the folding externally and give a compromised immune system enough time to catch up. It wasn't a cure, it was a hand reaching down into the water she worked. The synthesis timer beeped. Jinsu checked it. 2 hours to the first viable batch, he said. Enough for 2, maybe 3 doses. Beth and Elena first, Marin said. Beth and Elena first. She didn't say the rest of it. She didn't need to. Jinsu was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What about the other people in there?" She set down her pen. Outside the culvert, the desert was doing what it always did, going on. Indifferent, vast, the same alkaline gray in all directions. Somewhere 8 miles east, there were 3 townships of people who had been declared dead by a foreign power and abandoned by their own government because the situation was easier to manage that way. 31,000 people. "I know," she said. "The synthesis scales," he said. "If we had a bigger incubator, Beth, you said there were buildings still standing inside." "What kind?" Beth looked up. "There's a county facility. Agricultural storage. Dad worked there. They've got industrial fermentation tanks, the kind they use for soil treatment." Marin and Jinsu looked at each other. "How many guards on the inner perimeter?" she asked. "Not many," Beth said. "Most of them are on the outside, keeping us in, not keeping people out. Nobody's tried going in since the first week. Can you get us to the agricultural facility?" Beth's eyes went to Elena, who was awake now and watching Marin with the calm, flat focus of a child who has spent 11 days being frightened and has used up the available fear and come out the other side into something that looks like patience. "Yes," Beth said. "I can get you in." They went back through the boundary at night. Jinsu had a contact, an old grad school colleague who worked in county emergency management, and who, After a 45-minute phone call that Marin overheard in fragments from across the culvert, agreed to leave a gap in the eastern perimeter under the guise of equipment maintenance for 20 minutes starting at midnight. 20 minutes was not a lot of time. They made it work. Inside the zone, the night was different. The iridescent shimmer that was invisible in daylight showed up clearly in the dark. A faint blue-purple phosphorescence rising from the soil and from the vegetation, from any organic surface that had been in extended contact with the compound. The desert glowed. It was genuinely, heartbreakingly beautiful in the way that poisoned things sometimes were, and Marin took exactly 3 seconds to look at it before she made herself stop. The agricultural facility was a long aluminum building, set back from a dirt road, surrounded by equipment sheds and a corrugated water tower. A generator was running somewhere inside. Beth had told them about the people who'd stayed, who'd organized, who'd kept the facility running on their own because there was nothing else to do. 24 people at last count, maybe more. They came out of the dark when Beth called to them. The face that emerged first from the facility doorway was a man named Alderman, broad-shouldered, sunburned, with the same iridescent discoloration on his forearms and neck, and the flat, steady eyes of someone who has decided he's going to deal with whatever comes. He looked at Marin. He looked at Jinsu. He looked at the portable incubator in Jinsu's arms. "You're not here to evacuate us," he said. "We're here to fix the problem," Marin said. "The Vethkai said it can't be fixed. The Vethkai doesn't know our plants." He studied her for a long moment. Around him, people were collecting in the doorway. She counted 17 faces, ages ranging from maybe 15 to maybe 70, all showing some degree of exposure. All watching her with the specific expression of people who have been disappointed a precise number of times and are deciding whether to be disappointed one more. She had spent her career in laboratories. She was not a person who made speeches. But she understood, looking at those faces, that the next 30 seconds mattered more than the next 30 hours. "I know the Vethkai told a government this zone is permanent," she said. "I know your government believed them, or found it convenient to believe them. And that's why nobody's coming. I know you've been in here for 11 days. Surviving on what you had and what you could find and what you could figure out." She held up the incubator. Instances a bridge molecule synthesized from a native desert plant, a creosote, something that's been in this desert for 200 million years dealing with worse than what the Vethkai threw at it. The first batch is enough for 3 people. But the tanks in this building, if you have feedstock, if you have nutrient substrate, if you have anyone with fermentation experience, we can scale it. We can make enough for everyone in this zone, and then we can make enough for the soil. Silence. The generator ran. Somewhere in the darkness a coyote called, one of the last things alive, doing its job because that was what coyotes did. Alderman said, "My wife has a PhD in biochemistry. I need her," Marin said. The name on her PhD was Dr. Carol Alderman, and she was 43 years old, and she'd been running the makeshift infirmary in the back of the agricultural facility since day 4. She came out of the lab space looking like someone who had not expected to receive exactly what she needed, was handling the shock of it with tremendous composure. They worked through the night. Beth and Elena got the first doses. Elena was asleep within the hour, breathing more easily than she had in days. Beth sat beside her and held her hand and didn't say anything for a long time. And then she said, "Can I help?" So they put her to work. The fermentation tanks were repurposed. Jinsu ran the synthesis protocol. Marin and Carol stood at adjacent benches and calibrated the process for scaling. Talking in the shorthand of 2 people who understood the same things from different angles, finishing each other's incomplete sentences because that was how you worked when there was no time for complete sentences. The other people, farmers, a mechanic, a retired teacher, 2 teenagers who turned out to be frighteningly competent at following instructions, kept the generators running and the temperature stable and brought food that nobody had time to eat and ate it for them. Marin worked at 4 a.m. She worked at 6 a.m. She worked while the sun came up and turned the aluminum walls of the building orange. She worked when someone told her the Vethkai's liaison vehicles had been spotted on the outer perimeter doing thermal sweeps, and she processed this information and kept working. Jinsu came to stand beside her at one point and looked at the yield projections on her tablet. 48 hours to enough doses for everyone inside, he said. I know. They'll find us before then. I know. She set the tablet down, picked it up again. We need to buy time. How? She thought about the emissary. About the way it had stood still with its filaments not moving. That quality of attention that she decided was indifference, but which she was now reconsidering. It had followed her personally. It had sent vehicles after her, specifically not after the checkpoint, not to reinforce the perimeter, specifically after her. The Vethkai emissary had cared about where she went. That meant it had looked at the satellite data. It had seen the green patches. It knew what she knew, or suspected what she knew, and it had classified it as instrument error, which was not what you did when you genuinely believed it was instrument error. It already knows, she said. Jinsu looked at her. The emissary. It knows the creosote is doing something. It marked it as instrument error because acknowledging it would require acknowledging that the zone can be remediated, which would require the Vethkai to take responsibility for 31,000 people, instead of just declaring the problem permanent and moving on. She stared at nothing for a moment. It's not stupid. It's just decided that we can't do anything about it. We're proving it wrong. See? Yes, so what do we do with that? She picked up her phone. She had 1 bar of signal. They were deep enough in the zone that the cell towers were patchy, but patchy wasn't 0. Pulled up the UN liaison's number. She looked at it for a long time. We show our work, she said. The documentation took 4 hours they didn't have. Marin narrated the spectral analysis into a voice recorder, while Carol compiled the synthesis, data into a format that a university biochemistry department could independently verify. Jinsu wrote the methodology in 2 languages. Beth turned out to have studied journalism before her daughter was born. Wrote the summary document. One of the teenagers, a girl named Sophia, who was going to be someone's best employee someday, formatted everything into a package that would upload, in the smallest possible file size if they could get it out. They sent it in fragments, phone, tablet, a ham radio that Alderman had kept charged out of some sense of preparedness he probably hadn't been able to explain to his wife until now, to the UN liaison, to 3 universities, to a science journalist in London whose email address Jinsu had remembered from a paper she'd written 2 years ago, to Marin's sister who worked in the county clerk's office and had no scientific training, but was the most stubborn person Marin had ever met and could be trusted to make noise. They sent all of it and then they kept working. The Vethkai came at dawn on the 2nd day. Not liaison vehicles this time. The emissary itself, on foot, which Marin had not known they could do, and which told her something about how seriously it was taking this. It came to the agricultural facility with 2 other Vethkai, smaller, different configuration, possibly specialists, and the amber translation box. And it stood outside the building while its filaments moved in that seagrass way and waited. Marin went out to meet it. The morning light was doing something to the ground. The phosphorescence was fading as the silencer compound broke down. In the areas closest to the creosote stands, the soil color shifting almost imperceptibly towards something living. She could see it if she knew what to look for. She wondered if the emissary could see it too. She stood in front of the emissary and said, "The remediation is proceeding." The translation box pulsed. A long pause. "It says the compound is irreversible," the translator rendered. "The compound is not irreversible. It is reversible by a mechanism your assessment did not account for. I can show you the data." She held up her tablet. "I sent it to 11 independent bodies in the last 18 hours. The methodology has been independently verified by 2 university departments as of this morning. The process is scalable. The contamination in this zone will be biologically reversed within 18 months. She took a breath. The people in this zone are not dead. They were never dead. And now they're not dying either. The filaments were very still. It says, the translator said, that it does not understand. Part, a long pulse, a complex output. It says it asks why. You cannot be compelled. You are not military. This zone offers you no personal advantage. It was designated unrecoverable. It asks why you chose to enter. Marin thought about her answer for only a moment. "My sister lives here," she said. "But it wouldn't matter if she didn't." The filaments moved. something shifted in the configuration of the two specialist Vethkai beside the emissary. A posture change, subtle, that the emissary's body language did not mirror. She noted it. It says, the translator said, that this is not a behavior its models predicted. I know, Marin said. That's the part you keep getting wrong. The confrontation, such as it was, lasted another 4 hours. There were calls between the UN liaison and levels of the Vethkai hierarchy that Marin was not privy to. There was a period where she was fairly sure the liaison corps was considering simply taking her into custody, and during that period, she stood in the doorway of the agricultural facility and did not move, and behind her she could hear the fermentation tanks running and Carol's voice giving instructions and the steady hum of machinery doing something that hadn't been done before. She thought about the emissary's question, why? She thought about what it would mean if she couldn't answer that question in a way that made sense to something with no face, no bilateral symmetry. No concept of a town where you grew up, or a sister who kept all your voicemails, or a coyote calling in the poisoned dark, because it was what coyotes did. She thought about the creosote. 200 million years. The same plant or something continuous with the same plant, filtering whatever the world threw at it, because that was the metabolism it had developed, and it had no reason to stop. No heroism in it, no decision. Just the long, patient persistence of something that had been here, long enough to know things younger organisms hadn't learned yet. Humans had been on this planet for a few 100,000 years. They were, in geological terms, brand new. But they'd been paying attention. First evacuation vehicle came through the perimeter at 3 p.m. Not because the Vethkai had authorized it, though authorization came, eventually, grudgingly preceded by a translation, that Marin's liaison rendered as something close to formal bewilderment, because the documentation they'd sent had reached its recipients, and 2 of those recipients were on the same Senate subcommittee, and one of them had gone directly to camera. And the footage of the iridescent phosphorescent desert that Beth had shot on her phone and sent to Marin's sister had been playing on 6 continents for 11 hours. The world had seen their work. The evacuation took 3 days. Medical teams came in for the exposure treatment. The synthesis protocol was transferred to a proper pharmaceutical facility and scaled within 72 hours. Marin didn't sleep through most of it. She worked, and when she stopped working she ate something that Jin Su put in her hand, then kept working. On the 4th day, when the last of the 31,000 people had been moved to temporary housing outside the zone and the remediation process was underway, and Marin was sitting on the hood of a truck that was not hers, watching the sun come down over the Nevada desert, the UN liaison came to find her. He sat beside her on the hood, which she hadn't expected. The emissary requested a direct communication, he said. Through me. It's unusual. They typically route everything through committee. What did it say? He looked at his tablet. Translated as accurately as I can render it, it wants to know if you will meet with it. Formally. Not about the zone, not about remediation logistics. It said, and this is the part I had to have the translator run 3 times. It said it wants to understand the mechanism. No, the liaison said. I don't think so, he read from the tablet. It said, chemical mechanism is documented. It wants to understand the other one. Marin looked at the desert. The light was different already. Not better. Not worse, just different. The particular quality of late afternoon that turned the alkaline gray into something almost warm. The phosphorescence would be showing in another hour, and it was fainter every night. 18 months, she'd said. She was increasingly confident she'd been optimistic. Tell it yes, she said. I'll arrange it. He climbed down from the truck. She sat there for a while longer. Somewhere in the temporary housing complex she knew, Beth Ruiz was sitting with Elena in an air-conditioned room, eating the first real meal in 2 weeks. Alderman was somewhere coordinating with the county about the facility, already planning how to get back in. Once the remediation hit a safe threshold, Sophia was probably already arguing with someone about credit on the synthesis paper, which was a fight Marin intended to make sure she won. Jinsu came out of the facility behind her and sat on the hood. They watched the light change. You know what it actually wants, he said. Yes. It can't model it. The choice. Entering the zone when there was no direct incentive and no guarantee of success. He was quiet for a moment. It'll study the data for years, and it still won't be able to model it. Probably not. You should tell it something useful. I will. What will you tell it? She thought about the creosote. About the long, patient work of being alive on a difficult planet. About Elena's face when the fever broke, and the way Alderman had looked at her when she said we can fix the problem. Not we'll try to fix the problem. The simple declarative weight of it. I'll tell it, she said. That we don't need a model for it. We just do it. She picked up her coffee, which was cold and bad, and she finished it anyway. We've been doing it since before we had a word for it. That's what they keep missing. Jinsu nodded. They sat there until the desert started to glow. In the low blue phosphorescence, in the places where the creosote grew thickest, the glow was already dimmer, already dying back. The soil underneath, tested that morning, had shown the first measurable change, a shift in pH, a partial restoration of the nutrient profile that had been there before the silencer fell. A beginning. In 18 months or 12 or possibly less, the desert would be the desert again. The coyotes would come back. Plants would come back. The people would come back. The Vethkai had not expected any of this. That was, Marin thought, entirely their problem. She climbed down from the truck and went back inside to work.